Hi, I'm Dr Ursula Hackett, author of Brilliant Essays, your practical guide for university essay writing success. Welcome to my special video series on dissertation writing. This video is about conducting elite interviews for your dissertation. In my own research, I've conducted over 150 interviews with policymakers, advocates, lawyers, professors, bureaucrats, even a cardinal. I tend to use semi-structured interviews. That is, I have a list of questions that are tailored to my respondent, but I let the conversation flow naturally, pursuing additional lines of inquiry along the way. There are many approaches to conducting elite interviews, but you want to be open to the possibility that the conversation might go in an unexpected direction. Otherwise, why not just email everyone a questionnaire to fill out? Elite interviewing is usually much more exciting than sending out a survey. You'll have real conversations with important people in which you can really probe individuals' attitudes, values, and motives. Here are my 5 top tips for conducting elite interviews. Tip number 1. When you're choosing whom to invite for an interview, be systematic with your sampling. Sometimes there's a natural grouping. I can contact all members of the relevant committees who consider the legislation I'm interested in, all the floor leaders, plus the bill sponsors. Make sure you have a defensible strategy for sampling. That is, a strategy that you can write about in your dissertation, which will seem reasonable and appropriate to your examiners. To help recruit additional interviewees, you can snowball, where you ask your interviewees for people they recommend. But it's often important to seek a real mix of interviewees and find balance. For instance, between those who support or oppose a piece of legislation, and people with different perspectives or characteristics. Think about age, race, sex, partisan affiliation, and any other variables of interest. Tip number 2, consciously follow up with slow responders. In my work on school voucher politics, my interview requests tended to get the most enthusiastic response from white Republican men. So I deliberately followed up with slow responders to represent alternative perspectives. Inviting people to interview is like gently shaking a tree and seeing what wildlife falls out. Don't pester people, obviously, but do be aware that there might be systematic biases in the sorts of people who are most likely to respond to a request for an interview, which could have consequences for the representativeness of your work and the sorts of conclusions that you can draw. Be assertive and speak to the gatekeepers, the secretaries and the PAs. You never know who might be willing to speak with you if you are proactive and flexible. Tip number 3, be professional and get your titles right. I always wear a suit. If in doubt, err on the side of caution and politeness. Always use surnames and the correct salutation, Mr., Mrs., Ms., Doctor if they have a PhD. Follow up with thanks. By the way, cardinals should be addressed as Your Eminence. Useful if you ever write a dissertation on ecclesiastical matters. Tip number 4. When recording your interviews, it's a good idea to use a dictaphone for accuracy, but make sure you get permissions before you start recording. You want to be free to think about your next question rather than taking notes, unless your shorthand is amazing. Ask for permissions explicitly so that your interviewees know what you're going to do with their information. Make a document and ask your interviewees to sign it, giving permission to quote them if needed, and permission to be listed as an interviewee in your dissertation appendix. There are circumstances in which you might need to conduct anonymous interviews, such as when you're probing sensitive subjects. That's something to think about and plan for well in advance, and be clear going into your interviews exactly how much anonymity you can actually offer. As long as your subject isn't too sensitive, don't forget you can record interviews over the phone or on Skype or Zoom. If you're doing research on a shoestring budget, and I did a lot of that as a student, staying in horrible places and catching cheap buses to interview locations in the middle of the night, then you can save a lot of time and money by doing virtual interviews. Tip number 5, be aware of both the advantages and the limitations of the interview method. Human beings naturally want to make themselves look good. They don't always get things right. They aren't always truthful. So you'll want to take your time and ensure you're well prepared in advance. It's a good idea to conduct as many interviews as possible. Confront the fact that people want to make themselves look good. Seek corroboration. For instance, if interviewees are from different backgrounds or partisan affiliations can corroborate each other's accounts, then you can be more confident that what they say is indeed true. I recommend triangulating with other sources of evidence. I don't rely solely on interviews. Interviews are good for probing motives and examining mechanisms, but you've always got to approach them with a sceptical eye, as you would with any method. Ask yourself, what are these people not telling me? Where are the gaps in their account? Do these assertions pass the smell test? In other words, do you think they sound credible? The fact is, interviews are messy. That's part of the charm and interest. It's intensely human. I can see statistically that in aggregate there are these variables that are associated with my dependent variable of interest, but interviews can identify the feelings, the beliefs, the strategic calculus that underpins those relationships. Interviews help us to probe the causal story and the mechanisms more deeply. They give us crucial information about these human beings at the heart of the analysis, these complex, interesting individuals who make decisions, hold beliefs, act, think, feel, judge, remember and anticipate. It's an incredible joy and privilege to speak with elites and to discover more about their world. Very best of luck with your own interview research. Enjoy it!